You're all set, Lauren. All yours.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Lauren Woolbig. I serve as the Director of the Office of Water Resources in the Illinois DNR and also serve as Chair of the Illinois State Water Plan Task Force. Thank you for joining us this morning on our second of 3 outreach sessions. The State Water Plan Task Force continues moving forward to voluntarily update the Illinois State Water Plan in conjunction with interested stakeholders and citizens such as yourselves. As a result of the task force's first outreach session in December, 13 key water topics have been selected as the principal focus of this plan. This second of 3 outreach efforts by the task force is intended to share our draft recommendations developed at this stage in the plan and to gather feedback on the state's draft water plan so far, as well as answer any questions that you may have concerning the draft recommendations. This update to the State Water Plan seeks to provide a 5-year unified focus on key water topics in the state to help guide the state's water resources programs, expenditures, and activities in an equitable manner. It is, in essence, a strategic plan for water in the state of Illinois. The State Water Plan has a mission and goal of addressing water issues facing the state. But more importantly, the update to the State Water Plan provides opportunity for unified voices to spotlight key water issues in the state, including social and environmental justice issues that are inextricably linked to water issues and woven into the plan, and then to recommend necessary changes and new ideas to elected officials and key leaders in the state of Illinois. I view the State Water Plan update as a blueprint for future state water resources development legislation as well. To recap, the key water topics that are associated in the plan include water quality, climate change, integrated water management, long-term funding, water sustainability, Lake Michigan, flood damage mitigation, aquatic and riparian habitat, water use laws and regulations, navigation, erosion and sedimentation, data management, and as shown on the screen here, lastly, recreation. Thank you for participating in this effort. This outreach effort is being recorded. This outreach session has been divided into 4 different breakout rooms to allow you to learn more about specific water plan recommendations and to offer comments and insights on specific topic recommendations included in that breakout room. The more detailed and specific your comments are, the better. You may change breakout rooms at any time. All breakout rooms and their associated call-in numbers and meeting codes are included on the State Water Plan Task Force. If you do not already have those numbers, simply do a Google search on Illinois State Water Plan, and it should take you to that State Water Plan Task Force page that provides all of the information. And so as shown on the screen here, simply click on the red text for the breakout session today, and you will be connected to that virtual room. Each breakout session will have a discussion leader, and each session will last 40 minutes. At the end of the breakout sessions, we'll reconvene back on this call to hear session report outs from each of the breakout session discussion leaders so that we can then collectively hear what was shared during each of those breakout sessions. Remaining on this call, we'll place you into breakout room 1 that covers integrated water management, Lake Michigan, and water sustainability. Breakout room 2 will cover water quality, long-term funding, and aquatic and riparian habitat. Breakout room 3 covers Illinois water use laws and regulations, navigation, recreation, and erosion and sedimentation. Breakout room 4 covers climate change, flood damage mitigation, and data management. To provide everyone in your room an opportunity to share during the allotted time, please type your comments or questions into the chat box or raise your hand, and the host will share your comment and or unmute you if necessary. When you enter the breakout room, please type your name into the chat box. If you have more to share than time allows, please provide written comments on our outreach survey, also available on the State Water Plan Task Force webpage, and also or by emailing comments to dnr.owrplanning@illinois.gov. And as shown here on the screen, that email address is provided on that website as well. All of these comments and questions will be shared with the task force. So at this time, let's plan to go to our various breakout rooms, and we will reconvene on this call at 10:50 this morning. Thank you very much, and I hope you have some great discussions. You can go to your breakout rooms now. Thank you.
Crap.
For those who are staying in breakout room 1, just hold tight. We're going to give a couple minutes to allow individuals to sign off of this link and join the breakout room they'd like. For those who are heading to breakout room 2, 3, or 4, please go ahead and exit out of this WebEx link and see the link in the chat to the State Water Plan Task Force. And from there, as you see on your screen, you can select the appropriate breakout room for your interest. Thank you. As a reminder, this is breakout room 1, which will be covering integrated water management, Lake Michigan, and water sustainability. If you'd like to join another breakout room, now's the time to go ahead and exit this group and find your link for the State Water Plan Task Force website. Lauren, I'll let you decide when you're ready to kick things off here.
All right. Yeah. Well, why don't we start and see if there's any particular questions or comments that anybody would have right off the bat, and if not, then we can kind of go through each of these recommendations and see if that triggers any additional questions or comments. I think we're a small enough group. If anybody has a particular question or comment, go ahead and unmute and share. And then if not, I'll start by sharing the recommendations under integrated water management. All right, yeah, hearing none, I'll start in, and as Wes has the screen in front of us here with these recommendations under integrated water management. The first one is a rather large recommendation, and it includes establishing and funding an Illinois Flood Center. I guess we're calling it the Illinois Flood Center for lack of a better term at this point, but it essentially is a center that would be formulated in the Prairie Resources Institute at the University of Illinois, and really would intend to serve as a portal for all water-based science and information. The example that I use is for hydraulic models that we have across the state. Those are kept by several different entities, depending on who developed that model. And so you might, if you're looking for a model on a stream, that might be located at FEMA, it might be located at the Corps, it could be located at the State Water Survey in Champaign, or it could be located at the Office of Water Resources in Springfield. It could even be held by whichever consulting firm developed that model. And so for, as a case in point here, the Illinois Flood Center would be that keeper of all the models and the current model and any modifications made to that model via permit applications and so forth, so that we have a common library to access that hydrologic and hydraulic information. It could also be used as a center for education, not only for professionals operating in the field of water resources and water-related programs, but for citizens and lay people alike to learn more about particular topics related to water. As we get into trying to be more diligent about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that includes such needs as perhaps putting out public notices or publications in multilingual capacity. And so rather than have individual state agencies have to hire staffing and do that for their programs, we could use an Illinois Flood Center, for example, to provide that kind of resources that state agencies could plug into to develop those kinds of publications and or to interpret feedback that we would get, for example, on a multilingual survey, such as we've used here on the State Water Plan, to be able to interpret results for those engaged in those programs. It also would then serve as a portal and a means to continue to enhance collaboration. The State Water Plan Task Force does that kind of in and of itself, but it could also help facilitate that kind of collaboration with engaged stakeholders or other groups or federal agencies on any given topic or focus area. It could provide help for reaching out to communities for local assistance. And then it could also finally serve as a point or a center for continued research and development of tools in the field of water resources. Of course, there's a lot of activity going on in 2D and 3D modeling and development, and that could again be centered there. Right now, we're engaged in trying to control Asian carp via a project that will be located on the public waters on the Des Plaines River in Joliet. And so there's a lot of research going on about adding acoustics and electricity and bubblers and so forth into the water column in our public waters. And that research could be contained and centered there, and we could have the expertise that helps develop that outside-based research in that capacity. So that's just some of the initial ideas we've had behind creating and establishing an Illinois Flood Center that gives us a common portal, a focus area. The plan right now in working between the Illinois DNR and the Illinois State Water Survey is to try and develop a symposium that would further explore this concept of an Illinois Flood Center with those participants that would have the best insight into what is needed and how such a flood center could best be used and serve in the state of Illinois. So that is in the works as well as we continue to develop this recommendation in the plan. Moving on to other recommendations under integrated water management. The next one includes really a deliberate collaborative effort between the Illinois DNR and who has programs that monitor water use, water plans, and particularly water loss in those water supply systems, water allocation systems, and then the EPA, who manages state revolving fund resources. And the idea there was to help the IEPA prioritize and identify those areas where perhaps the state revolving fund, whether they're no interest funds or low interest kind of funds, would do the most good across the state. And of course, that particularly draws attention then to disadvantaged communities and under-resourced communities that may be in the greatest need of those kinds of resources to improve their conditions, their water supply, and reduce their losses in their community. The third recommendation is similar to that in a way, in that we would reestablish a local assistance program within the Illinois DNR Office of Water Resources. We had this kind of a program many, many years ago. Of course, attrition and change of staff and Illinois cutbacks had served to kind of diminish that program. And so this is a deliberate focus to try and reestablish a program that would allow for staff to have more one-on-one direct contact with most of the communities across the state of Illinois and help them deal with water resource needs, whether that is a flood problem that is occurring in their community, an urban flooding problem, whether they have water supply issues, have challenges trying to create a water system improvement plan, or have issues related to their wastewater treatment. We would have individuals that would serve as that liaison between those communities and the state programs that exist in Illinois to help them understand what might be available to help them, and or to develop whatever forms or applications would be required to do that. Again, like we've mentioned on some of these other recommendations, that could certainly serve the disadvantaged and under-resourced communities that don't have the wherewithal to know where they can even get help. The last two recommendations come straight out of the Urban Flood Awareness Act report that was produced here a couple of years ago now. And number 4 deals primarily with putting a spotlight on the need to have more consistent criteria for funding across state agencies. And so some agencies under their authorities are pretty free to dole out money as they see fit, and others are more tied to authorities that require detailed economic analysis and so forth. And so this recommendation calls for a need to really do some comparisons of program and funding criteria so that we're providing as much help as we can to communities and not confusing them by different programs having different requirements for funding. Last is the expansion of the Illinois Mitigation Advisory Group. This is a group made up of professionals across many different state agencies that come together when federal disaster dollars, particularly related to flood mitigation, are made available to the state of Illinois, and how we best prioritize and use those limited resources to maximize the benefit to communities and individuals in the state of Illinois. So that covers the draft recommendations that are included under integrated water management. So Wes, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Lauren. I'll be going over the water sustainability topic for the state water plan. As you can see on the screen, we have 3 main points that we focused on within water sustainability, including funding, stakeholder involvement and outreach, and plannings and studies. So to first start off, we'll be talking about funding, and that was to prioritize funding to vulnerable and low-income communities. Funding could come in various scenarios, I guess, one of them being assistance with analysis. That may include providing a bathymetric survey to a community that's on a reservoir water supply. That may include completing an analysis of their existing system and comparing a variety of alternative scenarios that can be evaluated. And that could also include potentially putting some capital funding towards a potential project as well. So those are all ways that we can provide either funding or services to communities. And again, that would be prioritized based on the needs of the community. The other aspect evaluated, and Lauren mentioned this in his set of recommendations, and we'll likely be working together as we move to a final draft, is the consideration of opportunities to expand the revolving loan fund and just providing further assistance to communities that are in need of financial assistance for water sustainability needs. The second topic was stakeholder involvement and outreach. The first dot point you see there is establishing regional committees throughout the entire state. Currently, we've established 5 of those regions. 2 of them are still working to develop their recommendations plan, but the other 3 have done so, but we still have 5 other sections of the state that we would like to continue to work with and provide technical assistance so that essentially we could work towards that second dot point of developing regional emergency plans and recommendations to ensure the water supply for the entire state of Illinois is sustainable. Lastly, we'd like to improve the outreach of state agency roles. Often there's confusion about which agency should be contacted under a variety of scenarios, whether that's drilling a well for whatever need. It could be accessing surface water for temporary construction needs. Often there's just miscommunication or not clear guidance given. And again, this is where we could see some overlap with Lauren's topic and maybe establishing that within the Illinois Flood Center, maybe providing clear guidance in that world for ensuring that the public is aware of who they need to contact and how to go about getting approval if needed for accessing water or whatever their interest in water is. The third topic that we focused on, or point that we focused on, was planning and studies. And the first and foremost priority in this is continuing to develop the statewide water supply versus demand analysis and continuing to provide updates on that supply and demand. So first and foremost, we already have established a statewide deep aquifer model for the state of Illinois, and we are currently finalizing a shallow aquifer model for the state of Illinois. We also evaluate reservoirs throughout the state and river systems to evaluate how much supply is available on each of those sources and how much demand is on those current sources. From there, we can evaluate if those sources are sustainable for the long term, whether that be for just continued use over the next 30 to 50 years, as often is the case of concern for aquifer systems, particularly deep aquifers. I know in northeastern Illinois, we've run into a number of communities that have found out that their deep aquifer source is not sustainable throughout the future. So we'll have to work with those communities to evaluate options to ensure they have a sustainable water source. Additionally, we'll also be looking at continuing updating the demands as well. So this includes taking the Illinois Water Inventory Program at PRI, or Prairie Research Institute, which collects water use every year, and updating our demand projections based on historic water use. We also factor in other parameters such as population forecast, climate change, land use development. So that's all incorporated in those demand projections. And we want to ensure that we're updating that supply versus demand, or what we'll call a statewide sustainability analysis on a regular basis. And again, for demands, that will likely be annual updates. For supply, we see that as a rotating as needed, as we may kind of get into our second point, and that's updating studies. So, often supply can be impacted by climate change. A prime example of this is reservoirs and the evaporation rate that occurs within reservoirs. So one of our top priorities will be including updating a 1950s study of evaporation rates in Illinois to evaluate the impacts of climate change, with the assumption that evaporation rates have significantly increased over the past 70 years. So that in turn will allow us to continue to update the available supply within all those reservoirs and river systems, and further update the statewide sustainability model. Another comment we wanted to address was improving high capacity wells. We continue to see an increased growth in irrigation, as well as just general well use. Currently, there's limited ways to evaluate the amount of water used from each well, and often the cost of metering can be expensive. So we're looking at alternatives or methods in which we can improve water use reporting. Again, this is critical to the first point, and making sure that we're accurately defining the amount of demand we have on a water source, and that way we can evaluate if that source is being used at a sustainable rate, or if it's being used at an unsustainable rate. And if it's the latter, then working with those water users to ensure they have water for the future. And that's our top priority. The last bullet point we had was update the drought preparedness plan. This is essentially the plan that the state of Illinois uses to evaluate and respond to droughts. And there was interest in more clearly defining each state's roles and responsibilities, what the triggers may be for some actions, including when we initiate the State Water Drought Task Force, which only functions periodically when needed. So there was just some interest in further clarifying which states take care of which responsibilities. And as you see on the graph, this is just an example of kind of that overall supply versus demand. As you can see here in Winnebago, just in this example, we have demand exceeding supply and not having a sustainable scenario there. Now, this will actually be broken up into greater detail, including water use by sector. So that could be community supplies, that could be industrial supplies, that could be irrigation supplies, power generation, and that can also be divided up more specifically by source, whether that's groundwater or surface water. So while this graph is beneficial in showing that there's some shortfalls, there may be some sources that are just fine in Winnebago County, and there may be some sources that are drastically overtaxed. And that's why we want to continue to improve and expand that model. So I'll just see if there's a moment. I see Kelly Thompson has the hand raised. If you'd like to, you can go ahead and unmute and ask a question.
Yeah, I think this is relevant for you. Just a question about whether or not the task force explored recommendations to create a reservoir development plan. I know you mentioned something about communities that have realized their aquifers are not as plentiful as what they had thought. So maybe going into recommendations on how, local communities might identify other options, such as, creating a reservoir.
Yeah, Kelly, that's a great question. Often we're finding that reservoirs are losing volume or available supply. We mentioned evaporation, but sedimentation is also a critical factor where we see that. And this is where we really focus on our regional committees. The state doesn't want to come in and tell a community how to change or how to fix their problem, but we do want to be there to provide the assistance they need to solve that issue. So that includes working with this Illinois State Water Survey at the Prairie Research Institute to help identify what communities are in shortfall or need additional reservoir or need additional water supply, and then working with that community or that regional committee to develop the answers. So we're more of a technical liaison to assist with that, but again, we want the regional committees to kind of be a grassroots entity that can kind of help develop their own solutions where they have the buy-in versus the state coming in and saying, we'll do this for you. I hope that clarifies.
Yes, thank you.
This is Lauren. I might, throw in another comment there with that, and that, and it might be more under the, aquatic and riparian habitat, but then as some of those criteria are developed for establishing low flow. So if a community is using surface water out of a river or stream there that would have cutoff flow rates for public safety and or aquatic resource concerns, that's when you'd have to also give consideration, do we need a reservoir, a backup supply for when the pumps have to be turned off from a river system. So good question, but that's also something that might need to be considered from that aspect as well.
Okay, is there any other questions? I'll pause a moment. You can raise your hand, type something in chat. If you're on the phone, just go ahead and speak up as well. That's fine with the size group we have. I think we'll be fine. If not, we will go ahead and move on to the Lake Michigan section. All right, Lauren, I will turn it back to you for the Lake Michigan discussion.
Sure. I'll go over these. We also, I think I see that we have Jim Casey on in the breakout room with us, who is the manager of the Lake Michigan program for DNR as well. And so we can turn to him perhaps if there are specific questions that come up here. So the Lake Michigan section recommendations are really broken into two aspects. The first being focused on really the water allocation, Lake Michigan water allocation and recommendations associated with that allocation program. And then the second being more on Lake Michigan, Great Lakes, economics and resiliency. So first covering these recommendations under our allocation considerations. Obviously the first one is to increase education and outreach related to water use and water conservation. Again, particularly to disadvantaged and under-resourced communities where they just, in many cases, we've found that there's a lack of understanding of what is needed or what could be done to help themselves when it comes to reducing water use, minimizing water loss, and really how to go about good water conservation. The second one is a big one in that working to simplify and improve annual water use reporting and the data submittal process that all of the Lake Michigan water allocatees need to go through on an annual basis. We certainly had some great feedback and discussion on the task force's first outreach sessions here back in December related to this topic and this issue. And so in response to those concerns and recommendations, this recommendation is to continue to proceed with simplifying and improving that water use reporting. Part of that will be a deliberate move back to a water volume-based metric and away from a fiscal non-revenue water loss metric that is being incorporated today. The third recommendation, it includes expanding our Lake Michigan programs with staffing that would be focused deliberately on our water system improvement plans. And so the state has a criteria that anytime a community is experiencing greater than 10% water loss in their community, that the state requires that a state water or a water system improvement plan be developed. And most communities are really good about going out and doing that. The real challenge comes is in implementing those plans, particularly when suddenly the community, needs a new fire truck, or, other things come up, a COVID response suddenly lands in their lap. There's many challenges that communities face that can become a hindrance or cause that water system improvement plan to be pushed to the back burner. Well, the idea of this recommendation is to have some full-time staff resource that would have established relationships with each of the allocatee communities and so forth to keep track of where they're at on implementing that plan, what challenges they're facing, and what resources might be available to help them continue to implement that plan. We really, as a region, actually as a Great Lakes region, we certainly are seeing deteriorating infrastructure from water supply lines that were put in, 70, 80, even 100 years ago that simply have reached the end of their life. And so the need is massive out there. And so having dedicated resources, again, particularly for under-resourced and disadvantaged communities that need that help to see about what it's going to take to make those improvements to those water system plans for the good of the region and the good of the Great Lakes region as well. The last recommendation under the allocation heading is really establishing a grant fund criteria for the state revolving fund and the way it's operated. And that comes back again to these disadvantaged and under-resourced communities, to what defines you as a disadvantaged community. Why should your community get a grant instead of a loan? And so we really need to be very clear about what criteria are used to establish need or local capabilities and capacities there. And so this recommendation focuses on establishing that criteria that would be used consistently across state programs. So whether you're dealing with Illinois DNR, Water Resources, or whether you're dealing with Department of Transportation or the Environmental Protection Agency, you would know that the same criteria would be used in making those kinds of determinations. So thank you, Wes. If we can go to the next slide. And again, this next slide focuses on Great Lakes and Lake Michigan resiliency and economics. So there are some great efforts afoot with NOAA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers trying to deal with coastal resiliency in the lakes. And of course, we've seen a lot of need for that with the recent high lake levels and the devastating erosion that we've seen from that. And so this recommendation really gets to continuing that collaboration with those federal agencies to see where we can go to with federal assistance to develop some of those resiliency measures. The second recommendation deals with providing support and promoting the tourism industry, Great Lakes cruise industry, and access into Illinois ports out of Lake Michigan. This is up and growing. This was really on a fast track before we hit impacts due to COVID. And so now as we try to work to come out the other side of the COVID impacts, we want to continue to encourage and provide opportunities for the cruise industries to provide benefits to the state of Illinois. On a similar note, pardon me, the third recommendation gets into increasing the idea of commercial goods movement in and out of the Great Lakes via the Chicago area waterway system, and to help the Great Lakes economy and the Great Lakes states and provinces understand and appreciate the full value of the west door into and out of the Great Lakes, and how that provides a direct connection to the midsection of the nation, to the Gulf of Mexico, to the Panama Canal and beyond. And so that's really what's the focus of that recommendation. The fourth recommendation goes into establishing offshore wind and wave energy generation on Lake Michigan, and continuing to develop parameters for where we would allow such green energy to be implemented and where we would not. And so to kind of optimize our opportunities there for green energy related to Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes. The next recommendation includes really continuing to try and enhance and restore critical coastal habitats with an emphasis particularly on those state-owned lands and wetlands that are hydrologically connected to Lake Michigan. And finally, seeking to improve a recommendation to improve the economic viability and capacity of our port communities, and those having harbors, marinas, and really to support continued economic development and community interests in those port and marina and those with critical harbors, those coastal communities. And so that kind of is a quick once over on the Lake Michigan recommendations. I think we have just a little over 5 minutes left in this session. Does anybody have any comments or questions regarding to Lake Michigan or any of those recommendations that we've covered under water sustainability and integrated water management before we head back or become the general session?
Hi, yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, great. My name's Kendra Kennedy. I am a member of the Underwater Archaeological Society of Chicago, so we do some diving in Lake Michigan, and I just was wondering about the coastal tourism and recreation opportunities point in this section. I just wondered, so from what I understand, shore diving off of Chicago is not permitted. And it's a little unclear to us whether there's a permit process or any way, to get permission to do that. This point brings up, is there a possibility of looking into allowing shore diving, maybe a permit process off of Chicago? There's a number of wrecks off of Chicago that are, interesting to divers and would be a great way to increase some of the recreation opportunities in Lake Michigan. I don't know if that's something that's ever been considered.
Well, thank you for that comment. I know that we have that out in the lake and some of those other, some of the other sunken interests out there, bringing it up right along the shore. That is kind of a new viewpoint. I might ask Jim Casey on the call here if he has any additional insights to existing regulations or history related to that. Jim, are you aware of anything there?
I think you're talking about just, instead of having a diving boat going offshore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's definitely charter boats that.
There's no state regulation that I'm aware of against that. That's more a city of Chicago regulation, which we wouldn't have any control over.
Sure.
So that's more or less, it's probably a park district or just plain old city of Chicago ordinance or whatever.
Okay.
But that's not something the state has said you can't do.
Okay. So is there any coordination with this water plan with the city of Chicago?
Sure. The water plan is, and again, it's to go to and be used as a vehicle to spotlight these concerns or, opportunities to the elected officials. So it certainly can be used as a vehicle, I think, to accomplish what you're wanting to do, Kendra. So I guess I would suggest if you could put it in an email, and we've got that
Sure.
email address on the website there, and submit that. That certainly could be a consideration under whether that's under recreation. It might fall under that part of the plan. But obviously, we don't necessarily have to have full-on completed recommendations, but the plan can
Sure.
also simply point out a need or desires out there based on the conditions that we're in 2021. So I would encourage you to submit that as a written comment and let the task force see how that best fits.
Great. Yeah, I'll do that. Thank you.
Well, Wes, it looks like we have folks starting to come back in from other breakout rooms. So why don't we just give it a moment or two, and then we'll proceed into the wrap-up part.
Sounds good. If there is any additional questions, and this can be general questions about the state water plan, especially for those who are coming back in, if you have any questions about just how things are moving along or anything pertaining to the state water plan in general, feel free to type that in the chat or raise your hand, and we can maybe address that question in the wrap-up section as well. And we'll just wait a few minutes as we see participants starting to come back in for the wrap-up session.
Well, welcome back to the main session. Let's give it about another 30 seconds or so to allow other folks to get back in, and then we'll proceed into the wrap-up portion of our outreach session this morning.
Again, if you're just entering, feel free. If you have any general questions about the state water plan, you can put those in the chat. Maybe we will address those with this wrap-up session.
Well, again, welcome back to the general session. The purpose of this wrap-up is to ask each of the discussion leaders to give a quick overview and summary of the items that were covered in each of the breakout sessions, and any comments or questions that were raised there quickly, so that we can get a general sense of what was shared collectively. So with that, I'm going to start with breakout session 1, which was Wes Couture as the leader, covering integrated water management, water sustainability in Lake Michigan. Wes, can you give us an overview, please?
Yeah, we'll do that, Lauren. We didn't have too many questions or comments, so we did spend some of our time just going over the recommendations. I'll just quickly go over them here. In the integrated water management section, we talked about establishing the Illinois Flood Center, which is kind of a library portal for data, including modeling, education, outreach, research topics, and developing technology and tools for new technology that's coming about. Also talked about prioritizing revolving loan fund to assist communities, and maybe even include grant funding as a potential opportunity. Also reestablishing the local assistance program within OWR to help communities, especially those in need. Having consistent funding across all state agencies, whereas some are allowed to fund under various different criteria. And then the last under the integrated water management was expanding the Illinois Mitigation Advisory Group, which essentially deals with federal disaster, post-disaster funds from agencies such as FEMA. We then moved on to the water sustainability section where we talked about prioritizing funding and services to vulnerable communities, improving outreaching, which includes expanding the regional committees to the entire state, and helping communities resolve their water shortfalls or communities that don't have a sustainable supply available, working with those communities and providing that technical assistance as needed. Lastly was talking about planning and working with the statewide water sustainability model. Essentially, that evaluates water supply versus water demand, and continually update that, not only with new population projections and supply data, but also by doing additional research such as models and research that includes climate change, such as evaporation rates that may impact reservoir supply availability. Next, we moved on to the Lake Michigan topic, where we talked at length about allocation, including increased outreach to disadvantaged communities and simplifying the annual water reporting requirement, which would be a shift back to a volume-based metrics. There's also discussion about expanding OWR staff to further assist in improvement plans and helping local communities to move through those plans and implement those. There's also discussion about establishing grant funds for those under-researched communities, which may also be done through that revolving loan fund as well. The next portion of Lake Michigan focused on resiliency and economics, which included continued coordination with our local and federal partners, promoting tourism and recreation, which we had a comment regarding about shoreline diving and the current restriction, and we found that's currently a limitation by the city of Chicago, but it could be something that is implemented into the state water plan's recommendation to see what kind of opportunities we can work with to develop that opportunity for tourism and recreation. Also on resiliency and economics, we talked about increasing commercial navigation, establishing provisions for offshore energy, such as wind and wave energy, protecting and enhancing and restoring coastal habitats. And the last comment included improving economic viability and capacity of ports, harbors, and marinas. So that was kind of an overview of Breakout Room 1. So at this.
Thank you, Wes. Moving on to Breakout Room 2 that, again, covered water quality, long-term funding, and aquatic and riparian habitat. I'll turn it over to Brian to give us an update. Brian?
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, we had a good discussion. Quite a number of questions and comments were provided. And so I just want to give an opportunity to go over some of those comments really quickly. One individual asked or made the observation that the EPA's impaired waters list is sometimes based on data that are decades old. And so made the recommendation that that list is reviewed, take a look especially or target those waters that are impaired based on very old data, and then trying to go back and reevaluate those waters. We got the recommendation that the Nature Conservancy has been working on what they call the Resilient and Connected Landscapes Framework, and that especially the aquatic and riparian habitat section could provide or find some very good information in what the Nature Commission is doing, and maybe be able to lean on that a little bit. We talked a little bit about, at least in the water quality topic, being sure that we consider the impacts of subsurface flow in agricultural regions. So these would be tiles and other flows, and really targeting that in the water quality section to discuss the problems there and the opportunities for recommendations. A really interesting comment on exploring the idea of water quality marketplaces or trading sort of framework to reduce nutrient loading in streams in particular. This might work like, the carbon sort of trading framework that we're a little bit more familiar with. We got a recommendation that, especially within the aquatic and riparian habitat section, that we try to build in a bit more synergy with the Wildlife Action Plan the Department of Natural Resources uses to guide some of their operations, and especially to kind of build a synergy between the different sections of that plan when looking at the recommendations. And then finally, got a recommendation that we look at developing a framework for the economic costs of poor water quality, and then using that as leverage for educating and then developing ways to improve water quality. Thank you, Lauren.
Oh, okay.
Great, thank you, Brian. We'll move on to breakout room 3 that covered Illinois water use laws and regulation, navigation, recreation, and erosion and sedimentation. And I believe that was led by Steve Altman. So Steve?
Yeah, we actually had a little issue because our link wasn't on the right link wasn't on the website. So we didn't have a lot of discussion on there. We did have some, discussion about kind of the purpose of the topic group, where we needed to be focused. And then we also had some discussion about public waters laws, and kind of tying in with recreation about some of these streams that are non-public bodies of water. What can and can't be done. There is a lot of interest in looking at ways to come up with a program that could indemnify landowners so they wouldn't be sued, they wouldn't be liable if folks were using the property. They're looking at options for doing that. It could intersect with regulation with does there need to be a law in place? Does there need to be some sort of program that could do that for the property owners? That was pretty much limited to what we discussed today, since we only had a couple of people come in. So apologize to folks who would like to come see us. So thanks.
Oh, sorry about that technical difficulty, Steve. And for those who did want to get into that session and make a comment, please use the email site or the survey to provide those comments, and we'll cover that here at the very end again on how to do that. So thank you, Steve. The final breakout room number 4 covered climate change, flood damage mitigation, and data management. And Tara McFarland was the lead there. Tara, can you please give us a wrap up?
Sure, thank you. One of the sections we talked about is climate change. And that section's a little bit different, or that topic for the report, because it is an overarching issue that touches really all the remaining 12 topics in the plan. And so because it's precipitation, everyone's pretty much aware that it's been changing and is expected to continue to change in the coming decades. So because it impacts so many other issues, this section will be addressing the introduction to that issue and focusing on areas maybe not covered in each topic. But just to let everybody know, each topic, like mine, flood damage mitigation section, will be addressing climate change specific impacts still in their section. So I just wanted to make that clear because climate change is a little bit different than the rest. And so within climate change, the critical impacts that the group is recommending, they're seeing issues related to flash drought and then rainfall seasonality, and then also land use changes. Land use impacts climate and the water cycle in those areas. So they are talking about some specific recommendations, more about overall research and outreach to communicate that research results with more decision makers and to improve communication about those risks. And they are going to focus, they recognize that climate change impacts different areas slightly differently within the agriculture, urban, and then extreme weather. So those will be some of those recommendations that you'll see within the climate change topic. And within the flood damage in mitigation section, we're going to be looking at different ways to identify the hazards. We're going to look at those long-term precipitation changes. We're going to look at outdated models and ways to update those maybe a little faster than the normal regulatory method through FEMA. We're going to try to update some of our prediction tools with better inundation mapping and more damage assessments. And then we also want to focus on equity and make sure that when you purchase a property, that information about previous flooding or sewer backup, or if you're in a floodplain, all that information is available, and to make that more equitable to all the vulnerable communities out there. And then we'll also be focusing on different mitigative efforts, and that would be upgrading the existing infrastructure and try to bring in more green infrastructure options or natural methods. And then we also want to provide guidance to some of those underserved communities to help them with some technical support or how to apply for grants, because there is funding out there, but we're not sure that all those communities out there have a good understanding of how to obtain that funding. And then we also want to provide incentives to communities for partnering, because we feel that that can optimize benefits and spending if a group can come together and share their resources. And then long term, we recognize that we need to prioritize the infrastructure of the different mitigation efforts out there and make sure that we're focusing on best value and socioeconomically depressed areas. And then for data management, that group is focusing more on stream data management at this time, based on some of the recommendations from the first outreach. And what their main recommendations moving forward are to include stations in some of the rural and smaller watersheds, because those react so much differently than some of the larger watersheds. And they want to continue to maintain our stations' stream data, because the long-term impacts of climate change, all that data is very important, and we need to make sure that we maintain what we've got and stop closing any that might be some of our shorter term stations, because again, that long-term data set is very important for so many of these groups, including mine, the flood. We need that data to help do projections. And then they also are recommending some sort of a working group to collaborate within all the different agencies and all the different communities within the state and really gather all that data together. And I think it was addressed earlier of developing an Illinois Flood Center that sort of is a clearinghouse and maintains all that data and collaborates among the different agencies. So in terms of questions that came up today, that we really talked about urban flooding as a main concern, and making sure that the state water plan addresses some of those, and really evaluating the green versus the gray infrastructure, and come up with some sort of method to look at, especially up in the Chicago regions, and get a better understanding of what's going on up there. And then we also talked about the funding itself. All these topics have recommendations that will require funding. So again, we talked about we may need to look at things out of a different lens and collaborate amongst other private and community partnerships. We need to leverage other funding sources, maybe some federal, like for climate change. That's really a global issue. So maybe we can leverage some of the federal funding for research. So that's pretty much what we talked about today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tara, for going through all that. It sounds like you guys had a really good discussion in that breakout room as well. Well, that kind of covers everything that was discussed today. On behalf of the Illinois State Water Plan Task Force, I want to again say thank you to everybody that participated today and for your comments. And again, we welcome continued comments to be given to the State Water Plan Task Force via a survey that we've made available and or on an email address that's also on there. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wes Couture to cover a couple of those quick housekeeping items on how you can continue to provide comments and how to resource more information about the plan. And thank you for your participation today. Wes?
Thank you, Lauren. On your screen, you should see the State Water Plan Task Force website that we have set up. And this is really the clearinghouse for anything and everything relating to the State Water Plan update. So as you see, if you haven't had the opportunity yet, we strongly recommend you come take a look at our pre-recorded summary of recommendations for all 13 topics that can be viewed or downloaded from the site, as well as getting a copy of the links or the slideshow for that presentation. We've asked about or received questions about if we're going to share the breakout meeting slides, and our response kind of is that the breakout slides are typically just taken from the main presentation, so they can be found at this link here. As this is our last Q&A session, we will be moving next week to post the recordings of all the breakout meetings. So they will be shared, or this table will be updated to share the recorded video of each breakout if you're curious about what was discussed at another topic or another meeting, or maybe you came in a little late and wanted to see something. Those will be shared in this table, and it should be updated within the next week. The main priority we ask you to focus on is the public survey. So we have a link to the public survey. We ask you to give your feedback on these recommendations for all 13 topics, and that can be done through the public survey. And also, if you prefer, there is an email link that can, where comments can be submitted via email. Lastly, as we scroll down, we'll see a number of things, including all of our contacts for the lead individuals, but most importantly, the project schedule. And this is subject to change, but this is what we have laid out currently, is that right now we are holding the public comments period until June 18th. So that's when the survey will be available until, and emails will be received until, is June 18th. From there, we'll be moving to finalize the recommendations in August and begin developing the final draft of the report. There will be one more public outreach event, which will be essentially named Phase 3 of the public outreach for the State Water Plan. That's right now tentatively set for November 17th. And from there, we'll move to publish the report on December 31st. So with that, that's just a summary. Lauren, I'll turn it back for you for any final words before we conclude the outreach.
Thank you, Wes. I have no further comments. Just again, thank you everybody for participating, and thank you to the task force team who made themselves available to go through the draft recommendations today. We look forward to additional comments that the task force will consider as we continue on to try to put a little more meat onto the draft recommendations and head towards finalizing those draft recommendations and developing the plan that we would be prepared to present this fall again for general information and comments. So with that, I think we'll put a close to today's session, and everybody enjoy your long weekend if you have one. Thank you for participating. And with that,
Thank you all, guys.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you all.